Hello, I'm Dr. Karen Hiltz, and this is the Apple Report. And we're going to talk about state constitutions this week. State constitutions are the ones where you will find education language. It'll usually be an article, a section, sometimes it's a chapter, but the state constitutions have education language. And some constitutions have broad language. Some constitutions have a more narrow perspective with regards to education, or a more umbrella, overarching perspective. For example, Virginia has an article, and there are only like about 10 sections under that article. They're not long, they're rather brief. But then if you look at a constitution like Louisiana, they have a fairly extensive section on education because they break it down. They break it down with regards to funding. They break it down from a board perspective because they have a state board. They have local K-12 school boards, but then they also have boards that manage or deal with the higher education elements or institutions, within their state. So depending on which constitution you're looking at will determine how broad or how narrow the language is and what they manage and operate, and the intent of the education system for the state. Now, last week, under the U.S. Constitution, during the U.S. Constitution discussion, we talked about Blaine Amendment language. Now, the state constitutions is where you'll find that. If you go to the section that talks about education, you will typically find language that discusses or puts parameters or restrictions around using public appropriated dollars. Now, not all states have Blaine Amendment language. According to the Institute for Justice website, they will tell you that there are 37 states that specifically have, to some degree, Blaine Amendment language, meaning that you cannot use public money to fund education other than public education, public institutions that provide education. So, for example, if your child went to a Catholic school, you cannot get public money, public taxpayer money to fund that. If you homeschool your children, you cannot get public money to fund that either, in the majority of the states. Now, there again, I need to be careful here because each state has its own constitution. Each state has its own structure. What you typically will find in every state is a state-level school board or education board, and then you will have local school boards. Now, some of the local school boards report and do what comes out of the state. Some states, such as the state of Virginia, they do have a state school board, and they develop the policy that comes out of the legislation. And the local school boards are the ones who actually have the authority with regards to managing the school system, and with regards to how things get implemented, they have more authority. There are some states where the local school boards do what the state directs them to do. So it depends, again, on the state that you're in as to how things operate. That's one of the reasons why the education system is such a behemoth of a bureaucracy. And you have to be familiar with the constitutional components of the state that you're living in order to understand. Another example is in the state of Ohio. There are a range of school choice programs. They obviously have public school, they have charter schools, they have school choice programs, they have a variety of scholarships, et cetera, but all of that is driven by what their state constitution allows or doesn't allow, and then what their legislature will legislate. So in Virginia, however, there's really not much in the way of school choice. There's public school, there's private school, and there's homeschool. Now, Virginia does authorize or allow charter schools, but basically charter schools are part of the public school system. but there are very, very few charter schools in the state of Virginia, and there are a lot of reasons for that. And later on, we'll talk about charters. We'll have a video on charter schools, and I'll talk more about that. But the bottom line here is that the choice that you make to educate your child is driven by state constitutions, the language in the constitutions, and the legislation that is put forth, passed, and then where the state boards, the State Department of Education and the state boards write the policy and then push it down to the local school boards. So I hope this was informative for you. I know that we went a little long this time, but I ask that you share and that you do some research with regards to, if you are having issues, you do some research for your child, for your state. And we will talk a little bit more, I think, next week with regards to going into some of the differences and variances with regards to the Constitution and what each state or some of the states allow or don't allow. Anyway, thank you for listening, and I hope you will share this.